Yeah, I was here, I think it was 4 years ago, maybe 2022 or something. And so some of you have heard me before. Um, once I was invited to speak to a gathering of foster grandparents in Orange County in California. And I had spoken at their summer gathering the summer before. I don't know why they invited me back again, but so I went and spoke again there. And afterwards, a foster grandmother came up to me, and I think she liked the talk. She had big tears in her eyes, and she grabbed both my hands. And she said, "I heard you last year. It never gets better." So kind of hoping she misspoke there, but not entirely sure. I've never spoken anywhere where they had big bowls of popcorn on the table, so help yourselves. I admire MIC because you don't shake your fist, you roll up your sleeves. You don't argue with an existing model, you fashion a new one. You don't waste any time circling the wagons, you just widen the circle. And good for you. You make a difference in Missoula. As Megan was saying, you don't go to the margins to make a difference because then it's about you. But you go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. And then it's about us. What Martin Luther King says about church could well be said about our brief gathering here tonight. It's not the place you've come to, it is the place you go from, and you will go from here eventually tonight to stand at the margins because it's the only way they'll get erased. And you will go from here and you will imagine a circle of compassion, and then you will continue to imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And you will go from here to really choose to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And there's a particularity to your going from this place because you will stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. And you will stand with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And you will go from this place and stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. You will stand with the demonized until the demonizing stops, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And you're going to have to brace yourselves as you go from here, but that's what it means to roll up your sleeves. Because the world may well accuse you of wasting your time at the margins. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." Each one of you will go from here and you will participate in this great freedom of other voices getting heard. As Katie said so eloquently in her poem, you will be delivery systems, really, of hope to people for whom hope is foreign. Just a brief, Homeboy Industries was started a long time ago when I had hair, and 1988 when I was pastor of the poorest parish in Los Angeles, and nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other, which led the LAPD to call my parish the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in all of the city. I buried my first young person killed because of the sadness in 1988. I will return home and bury my 264th, a young man named Miguel. Not all from that community, but I know a lot of gang members, so I get asked. So we did a lot of things. We started a school because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had gotten the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them, so they were wreaking havoc in the projects. They were writing on walls, selling drugs. They were violent. So I walked out to them, and I would kind of isolate them one at a time. I'd say, hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And then each one said, yeah, I would. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them. So that kind of forced my hand. So across the street from the church is our parochial school, Dolores Mission Elementary. And first 2 floors, a big 3-story concrete building. First 2 floors were K to 8. But the entire 3rd floor was the convent. So one evening I gathered all the nuns together in the living room, and I sat them down, and there were about 8 of them. And I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out? And we could turn the convent into a school for gang members. And they looked at each other and they said, sure. And that was the entirety of their discernment process. And we were off and running, and gang members came in large numbers to the school, to the church property, which created a disconnect because people would sidle up to me and say, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out, which was a good gospel challenge, I thought. And they all came from all 8 gangs, so that meant we had like at least 3 brawls a day at this school. And teachers didn't last very long. I had a principal that lasted exactly 1 day. I called him the next day to find out where the hell he was, and he had changed his phone number and apparently checked into a witness protection program. But they came, and then they said, if only we had jobs. And then myself and the women, and the projects were mainly, profile was women with children, not a lot of men. Myself and the women, we marched around the factories that surrounded the housing projects trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So we just started stuff, a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center on the church property. Then in 1992, after the acquittal of the 4 police officers who beat down Rodney King, every pocket of poverty in Los Angeles ignited, except the poorest pocket, my parish. And then the LA Times wanted to know why my community didn't erupt, so they came to me, and I said, well, I don't know entirely, but we have 60 strategically hired gang members who have a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before, and more to the point of your question, a reason not to torch their own community. So the next day the article appeared. The following day I was summoned to the Beverly Hills office of a movie producer named Ray Stark, who happened to have $500 million. And his first question to me was, how should I spend my money? As I look back on it now, I can see that I woefully undershot my request. I was young, I had hair again. I said, well, there's an abandoned bakery across the street from the school. You could buy it. It has ovens, they don't work, but we could fix them. We could put hairnets on rival enemy gang members, and I don't know, they could bake bread, and we could call it Homeboy Bakery, and that was the entirety of my business plan. And he said, sure. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future to Homeboy Industries. And now 10,000 folks a year walk through our doors wanting to reimagine their lives. They all come barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. They come looking for a place that's safe, where they can be seen and then they can be cherished. What MIC is about is not the survival of the fittest, but the thriving of the nurtured. And so we all know that systems change when people change, and people change when they're cherished. If it's true that the traumatized are likely to cause trauma, then it has to be equally true that the cherished will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. Every single person who walks through our doors comes with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. So we lock arms and we create a community that soothes people. We have so many lifers now with the changes in the law who walk through our doors. And they always say the same thing. We're used to being watched, but we're not used to being seen. And I think that's what MIC does. You see people. There's something about that will change everything. And in the end, the goal is to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it, especially now in these divided times. I remember many years ago, on a Sunday evening, I flew to Sacramento. I was going to speak at a Cristo Rey school the next day, Monday morning. And I had two homies with me, Robert and Carlos. And I had masses in the morning, so I had to leave a little bit later than I like. And so it was nighttime. And actually, we don't call Carlos, we call him Chamuco, which is kind of an affectionate name for the devil, because he has two very pronounced, very dark devil's horns tattooed on his forehead, though he's chipping away in our tattoo removal clinic. And so the three of us get on the shuttle bus to go to the car rental place. And Robert and I are kind of a little bit towards the back of the bus, and we're across from each other. But Chamuco goes to the very back of the bus and sits there. And then I watch everybody start to fill the bus. And I notice how when they go to sit in the back, they see Chamuco and they do a kind of a foxtrot avoidance of this guy, and they won't sit next to him until finally there are only two seats left on either side of Chamuco. And people they sit next to him and not at all happy about it. And then we go from the airport to the car rental place, and it's very dark and it's very wooded and there are no lights. And somewhere in midpoint, our electric shuttle bus conks out. It just stops. The oddest thing was nobody spoke. It was dead silent. So much so that you could hear the clicking of the key as the woman who was driving the bus saying, "I'm working on it," click, click. Silence, dark, wooded, in the middle of nowhere. And suddenly from the back of the bus comes this lone voice. "I saw this in a movie once. It does not end well." Well, the entire bus exploded in laughter. And it was one of the most unanimous things you could ever imagine. It was at Homeboy, we talk about laughing from the stomach. People were just howling with laughter. And this was a Sunday after the Tuesday in November when Donald Trump became president for the first time. And I remember thinking exactly at the same moment that half this bus, no doubt, voted one way and half this bus voted another. But suddenly kinship so quickly, unanimous, hearts joined with each other in hilarity, and it was all brought to you by the guy with the devil's horns in the back of the bus. And suddenly kinship. It is God's dream come true that we create a community of cherished belonging, because it's the relationship that leads us to healing. And relational wholeness is the goal. We're all just walking each other home. Many years ago, I would ride my bike, my big old beach cruiser in the housing projects, and I would patrol the 8 gangs that would congregate in their neighborhoods, in their barrios. And this one time I pulled into an alley where this group of homies from this one gang were, and the older guys came out to greet me, and then this little guy came out. I found out his name was Danny, and he lifted his shirt to reveal that he had a gun tucked into the front of his pants. I had no idea why he wanted me to know this, and then on one of my many visits at night, he said to me, he made a solemn vow, I will never step foot in Homeboy Industries. And so I never saw him at Homeboy Industries. I saw him in the streets. I saw him in that alley. I saw him at juvenile hall and detention facilities. Finally, at 18, he went to prison for 2 years. And in all recovery, they say it takes what it takes. Gang recovery is not so different. It takes what it takes. It can be the birth of a son, the death of a friend, a long stretch in prison. It takes what it takes. For Danny, he got out of prison after 2 years. Now he's 20 years old, to discover that his mother had 6 months to live. She had pancreatic cancer. He had a lot of siblings, but he ended up being the designated hospice caregiver. And I would go over to the house, and he was so tender with this woman. And truthfully, she had been less than tender to him as he grew up. And as a priest, one day I anointed her forehead with oil and said a blessing prayer. A week later, she died. A week after that, I buried her. And a week after that, for the very first time in his life, Danny walked into Homeboy Industries. And I watched him work side by side with guys I know he used to shoot at. And I watched him get his GED and learn how to laugh from the stomach. And one day he came into my office and he began very dramatically, what happened to me yesterday has never happened to me in my life. And he proceeded to tell me that after work at 5, he went to the Chinatown train station to take the Orange Line east to go home. He said the train was packed, but he managed to get a seat. And standing right in front of him, holding onto a pole, he said, was a medio pedo guy, a guy who's a little bit drunk. And he has tattoos on his hands, so Danny knows he's a gang member, but he's an older guy. And Danny's wearing a sweatshirt that says Homeboy Industries, jobs, not jails. And the little bit drunk guy looks at Danny and goes, hey, you work there? And Danny nods. And the guy says, is it any good? And Danny shrugs and he says, well, it's helped me. In fact, I don't think I'm going to go back to prison because of this place. And then Danny stands and he fishes into his pocket. He has a pen and a small piece of paper. And he very carefully writes the address on this piece of paper. And as he's telling me the story, he says, I couldn't believe I knew the address by heart. And he finishes and he hands it to the guy. And Danny sees him. And Danny says, you come see us. We'll help you. And the guy takes the paper and he sees Danny. And he says, thank you. And the train stops and the guy gets off and Danny sits down. Now he returns to his earlier refrain. What happened to me next has never happened to me in my life. Everyone on the train was staring at me. Everyone on the train was nodding at me. Everyone on the train was smiling at me. And now he can't speak. And for the first time in my life, I felt admired. And suddenly kinship so quickly. And everyone on the train nodding and staring and smiling had decided to create a community of cherished belonging on the Orange Line heading east. Let me just finish with one last story. I was invited many years ago to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. It was a gang in service. And I'd done a lot of these in the decade of death, which was 88 to 98. Social workers didn't know what to do. Why do kids join gangs? And so they commandeer a hotel ballroom from 9 to 6, and they have workshops and breakout sessions and keynotes, and people come in and say, what if we were to infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign, tangible hope? And what if we were to help heal trauma? And what if we gave access to mental health care that was culturally appropriate and timely? Things like that. So I'd done a lot of these, so I agreed to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. I bought my ticket. A week before I was to fly, I pull out the letter, and to my horror, I discovered, having not read this letter at all, probably, I discovered that I was to be the only speaker from 9 to 6. The whole damn day. And I said to myself what the homies often say, oh, hell no, I'm not going to be the only speaker. So I pull in two homies, Andre, an African-American gang member, and Jose. And the two of them are in their 9th month of our 18-month program. And I sit them down and I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I would like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I had never heard their stories before, and Jose gets up first, and I think he's like 25 years old at the time, and, shot caller from his gang, been to prison, felon, tattooed. In his 9th month, we'd move everybody around from tattoo removal, or they work in one of our 16 businesses. But he kind of glommed on to our substance use disorder team, a man solid in his own recovery, and now he's helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. So not only was he gang member, prisoner, shot caller, he also had a long stretch as an unhoused man, even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. And then they did what you just did. And then he continued, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage and she knocks on the door. A guy comes to the door and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me. My grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt, because the blood would seep through. Second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking. So overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And as it says in the Acts of the Apostles, and awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion as we go from this place lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. And this holy place where we are gathered was never going to be just the place we came to. It was always going to be the place we go from, to be delivery systems of hope, tangible hope, to those for whom hope is foreign. And my sense of everybody here is that you gave up a whole long time ago, caring if anybody might accuse you of wasting your time at the margins. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Thank you very much.